Hello, everyone. This is Cody Lee of BlackCatBooks.org, author of I, the Dragon, Cruel and Beautiful Rabbit Hole, Lauren Frey, and the upcoming Jaw of the Dragon. I actually made a glaring omission when it came to my Luigis video. I wanted to talk about a lot of high-profile games that were promoted by the by the Game Awards, by Jeff Keighley, by the gaming industry that got like acknowledged when they really shouldn't have. And unfortunately, due to the nature of like the Game Awards, I actually overlooked several entries, and the two that immediately came to mind immediately, while I was at work, like days later, there were two like major things that I completely overlooked. And that was best animated feature and best fighting game. Of course, I've talked about both of these things extensively in the past, but I really wanted to emphasize this again. Like now that like we're at the end of the year and this stuff is not going to be talked about, let's go back and look at like these two things that really bother me. And that is, of course, Multiversus for the fighting game and Cyberpunk Edgerunners for like the best animated adaptation. Now, it is hilarious to me that these games that were heavily shilled by YouTubers, that were promoted, that were like, big, which were a big deal for like the first couple of weeks after release. Like these things had like massive advertising campaigns behind them. They were huge, right? This is like I saw YouTubers who didn't even like Smash playing Multiversus and trying to convince us that it was great, right? Like I saw people like who weren't anime YouTubers like trying to convince us that like Cyberpunk Edgerunners was one of the best games, one of the best animes ever made, and that it was like going to save Cyberpunk 2077, and that like the game had been patched into being like the game of the year for 2020. So much so that CD Projekt Red is releasing a game of the year edition for Cyberpunk 2077, even though it was never by any stretch of the imagination a game of the year worthy caliber title. Right. That died down eventually. Of course, like Multiversus like suffered the same fate that every stream bait game does, that it eventually dies a slow, like a very sharp, like sudden, painful death. And Cyberpunk was forgotten as well. People were eventually like the anime season started, and we got better shows. Spy Family season 2 started back up, and Chainsaw Man premiered. Chainsaw Man is one of the best shows ever made, and I think like after those shows premiered, Edgerunners was completely forgotten, right? Like it's a lot like Castlevania in that respect. I think this is like a trend when it comes to like these Netflix shows, is that like they are extremely hyped up at launch when people are like binge watching them and stuff like that. Like holy fucking shit, it's so crazy. Wait until the last 30 seconds of the final episode, guys. And then when like people actually like sit down and watch it, like they realize that like, this isn't very good. Cyberpunk is not a strong IP. Edgerunners is not a good show. CD Projekt Red is not saved. Like it is. It was obvious, I think. It was funny how sharp and sudden the decline the backlash towards Cyberpunk Edgerunners actually was, because as we all know, people who follow the channel for the longest time, Edgerunners was one of the most blatant shilling campaigns I've ever seen on like an anonymous message board. Like 4chan, like posts about Edgerunners were everywhere on 4chan for like a couple of weeks, and like it was really blatant that it was like fake and gay. People were calling them out on it, and like eventually they had to fuck off. Like CD Projekt Red did not hire the best Indian marketers in the world. Essentially, it was pathetic. They didn't convince anyone that this show was great, and eventually it lost out to Arcane, which I don't know anything about. I think that's like a League of Legends show. I don't know anything about League of Legends. I don't have any like opinions on it or anything like that. I'm sure it's better. From what I understand, it is better than Edgerunners. It is better than Castlevania. So at the very least, hopefully in the near future, we'll get past this phase of like people being bamboozled by video game adaptions that aren't like completely terrible. Because we are kind of reaching that point where I think like saying that like, oh, it's just like the game isn't going to like sell people on it anymore. Especially if it's like something like Castlevania and nobody actually knows. Mainstream audiences don't actually know anything about the games. So it's just I don't think that's going to be possible in the future. It's just like constantly pretending that like, oh man, this video game adaptation is so much better than other video game adaptations. Hopefully Edgerunners is the end of that. But I think the Super Mario Bros. Movie is going to be the end of that, actually. Considering we're going to have like a new high bar that isn't going to be topped easily. That's going to win the award next year for sure, assuming this specific category returns. That's I'm really looking forward to that. Breath of the Wild too, as well. Tears of the Kingdom is also going to win Game of the Year. So like I think we're actually going to see like a big Nintendo sweep next year in a lot of unexpected categories. I'm really looking forward to that. So yeah, Multiversus. I I think out of every game that like I talked about this year, I think I was most frustrated with Multiverses actually. Elden Ring I did complain about a lot, but like when you get right down to it, like I don't think Elden Ring is fundamentally a bad game. Like was it game of the year? No. Like From Software's formula is stale and tired. It has been since Dark Souls 2. But at the same time, like is the game bad? Like people clearly enjoy it, so it's not terrible or anything. Like my issue with Elden Ring came from the fact that people were saying it like Nintendo was scared of it, that it was like better than any Switch game that came out that year, that things like that. Like no, it's not true. Like Multiversus though struck me as something that people really wanted to pretend was better than Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. Like that was something I heard a lot, like from Darkside Phil and I think a lot of other no-name streamers, is that like, oh, I don't play Smash at all, but Multiversus, oh, it's really got my attention, even though it features characters from cartoons that I never watched because I was a grown man. I'm excited to play them and try them out and learn more about them and stuff like that. It was so unbelievably fake, like you kind of get the feeling in this day and age that like a lot of streamers will opt to these like free to play games because they have like this really big audience of people who like seeing other people like tune in to watch them, right? Like when it comes to like big AAA Nintendo games, like fans will just play them themselves. There is no real demand to see Darkside Phil play Splatoon 3, but like, seeing him play Multiverses, oh man, like look at him react to Ultra Instinct Shaggy or whatever. Like, oh man, Kevin Conroy's in this. Oh man, I wonder how he's going to react to these Steven Universe characters. Like, I think that was kind of the appeal, was just seeing like Darkside Phil, like people like this, like react to these characters that they don't really know or care, know anything about or care for, honestly. And like this is kind of my problem with stream culture and the stream community in general, is just this like it's more about the stream and like the channel, the YouTuber, than the game itself, right? We are, I think, at this point where like there are people ignoring perfectly good video games because they're not stream worthy, because they're not something that will pull in an audience, right? Like if I streamed, Pokemon Scarlet, would that pull in like big numbers? No, like people aren't interested in watching me play Pokemon Scarlet because first of all, I'm not like a pro high level Pokemon player or anything like that. I don't know a lot about the meta. I don't know a lot about the game. Like there's nothing I could showcase about that game that would interest people. Like there's definitely an audience for people who watch Pokemon games, but for like normal people, you're probably better off playing like the flavor of the month game to get like some kind of viewership, get some kind of retention, get some kind of like boost those sub counts, right? Like that's what Phil was doing. That's what these YouTubers are doing, is that they just latch on to the new popular thing as soon as possible in order to leech off of it. And that's kind of what these people have been doing for years now, is just this endless like cycle where they just like pretend to be excited about like projects like Multiverse until something comes along to replace it. I think we saw the same thing with like Guilty Gear Strive last year, right? Like people like Donkey were saying it was like, oh, one of the best fighting games I've ever played. But like now, who the fuck is talking about Strive like positively? You know what I mean? Like it just feels like it just feels really fake and inauthentic and just not very genuine. I really deeply disrespect it. Again, like this has been a problem with video games for a long time, but I've gone on record about this a long time. I've been going on record for this about this for a while. I do think things are getting better. Like I do genuinely think the dark age of gaming is over. You know, that period from 2007 to 2017, that whole like dark age where like Nintendo was the devil and that like was ruining casualizing video games, and only Sony and Microsoft can save us with their hardcore like brown shooters. You know, like realistic shooters. Like remember back when like people would complain about games being too brown as if that made them more realistic. Yeah, it's been a while since that was an issue, but you know, yeah, remember when Nintendo was just like it's been a long time since those days, right? Gaming journalists have lost their influence. YouTubers have like risen and fallen. People like Spoonie don't even exist anymore. We've gone through several console generations. New franchises have emerged. New classic games have released. Like the industry has changed. And I think like YouTubers will not be able to change along with it. I do think that like going forward, there's going to be more and more of a divide between like actual players and YouTubers. And as a result of that, I think more and more we're going to see them being unable to damage control situations like, say, a good Nintendo game coming out, right? We kind of already saw this with Bayonetta 3 and how like nobody was able to convince anyone that the game was bad, right? Like they pulled out all the stops to try and ruin this game and it didn't work, right? Like they've been trying to ruin Nintendo games all generation long since 2017, right? Since the Switch launched, and it hasn't really worked yet. Like the closest they ever got to was for ARMS, honestly. And I think a big reason for that was because it was such a new novel thing, and like the Switch hadn't really hit its stride yet, and like people like really tried to ruin this new IP. Didn't work. Min Min's in Smash. I'm sure we're gonna get an ARMS 2 eventually. We're going to like see these characters again. Really excited for that. I just don't. I hope my wish, one of the things I always wanted to do as a YouTuber, I hope that someday people start to realize just how good Nintendo actually is, right? I do hope that someday people realize that, like, you know, getting excited over things like Multiversus, getting excited about things like Edgerunners or Cyberpunk or whatever, like getting things like that as a getting excited for things like that is a waste of time. Like all you need to do to be happy is just, you know, do the things you enjoy, genuinely enjoy. And for a gamer, there's nothing that brings more joy than playing Nintendo.